And he is pushing with Steve Witkoff, with Kushner, with Rubio, endlessly, of course with help from many Europeans, Johnson Power, I see here, and so many others in this room, working day in, day out to get the Ukraine issue solved, to get the war brought to an end, a sustainable end, where Russia will never ever try to attack again. And when it comes to the Arctic, President Trump in his first term already said we should spend more time.
That is really a remarkable statement. And it is our entire desire to making sure that that capital is put into the ground as soon as possible, that each and every Ukrainian citizen can see the renewal, the rebuild, and they see a pathway for stable and predictable stability and freedom. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Larry. As you can see, we have a galaxy of heads of government here, but I thought I would begin with the one gentleman who is not a head of government at the stage, who is Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO. Mark, first, thank you for being here. I know you've been busy for the last 24 hours saving the Western Alliance, for which we all thank you. And you're almost getting as much applause as the Ukrainian soldiers. I guess the question would be, if I may, do you feel after these last few days that the crisis has been resolved over Greenland, and that Greenland will remain a sovereign territory of Denmark? And does all of this give you a sense that the United States, under current administration, is truly committed to the support of Ukraine and to the independence and sovereignty of Ukraine?
Yes. But let me say, on the Ukraine, absolutely, answer is yes. And I've never doubted this. President Trump is the one who broke the deadlock with Putin, started to negotiate, which was crucial because he was the only one who was able to do that from his position when he came into office in January. And he is pushing with Steve Witkoff, with Kushner, with Rubio, endlessly, of course with help from many Europeans, Johnson Power, I see here, and so many others in this room, working day in, day out to get the Ukraine issue solved, to get the war brought to an end, a sustainable end, where Russia will never ever try to attack again. And when it comes to the Arctic, President Trump in his first term already said we should spend more time and more energy on the Arctic and to defend the Arctic against the Russians and the Chinese, because the sea lanes are opening up. Greenland, yes, not only Greenland, it is the whole Arctic. 7 nations in NATO, 1 outside NATO, Russia, and these 7 have to defend themselves against Russia and China. And what we discussed yesterday, it was a very good discussion, is how can we do that? 1, how can collectively the NATO allies help here, the 7 in the High North, and also others to support that. But the 7 in the High North, including the United States, because also the United States is an Arctic country because of Alaska. And of course Canada, Iceland, Denmark, Sweden, Finland and Norway. How can we make sure that these countries collectively make sure that the Arctic stays safe, that the Russians and the Chinese stay out? And then when it comes to, so that's one work stream coming out of yesterday, and the other is to make sure when it comes to Greenland, particularly, that we ensure that the Chinese and the Russians will not gain access to the Greenland economy, to militarily to Greenland, and that will be a discussion taken forward based on what already happened last Wednesday when Rubio and Vice President Vance had their discussions with the Danish delegation to take that work forward, to make sure that that can never happen, that the Russians and the Chinese gain access to the Greenland economy or in a military sense. But of course, all of this is not about Greenland or the Arctic. First of all, this is about how can we protect ourselves against our adversaries. Our main adversary is Russia for NATO. And of course, we see China massively building up. So let's not be naive about China. But Russia is our main adversary. And these incredibly courageous Ukrainian soldiers, the Ukrainian military, the Ukrainian population are defending their country against Russia. And what I would hope today, we will discuss how we can help them. They need interceptors. They need our military support going forward. I know we have these peace talks going on. Great. Hopefully they will conclude soon. Yes, I know the European Union freed up 90 billion. Fantastic. But we know that will only be concluded somewhere in April, May. And today, Kyiv, Kharkiv, Lviv, but also so many smaller cities in Ukraine are being hit by Russian missiles, by Russian drones. We know that water supply is down. We know that electricity is down. It is minus 20 degrees in Kyiv as we speak. So what we need is to keep our eyes on the ball of Ukraine. Let's not drop that ball. And that means, yes, great peace talks, fantastic. We will do everything to conclude them successfully, but it will not happen tomorrow. And they need these interceptors, this military support tomorrow. So we have to stay concentrated. So to my European and Canadian friends, we have to do that. And the US is willing to supply as much military stuff Ukraine needs, particularly these interceptors, paid for by Europeans and Canadians. We have to keep going that flow, making sure that it is still there and that we don't lose sight of this main subject, which is fighting the Russians. The Ukrainians are doing it. They need our support. It's also about our collective security. That's what is at stake here.
How do I turn this on? I'm already failing at my co-moderating task since I can't turn the microphone on. Mark, congratulations on the last few days. Fareed, thank you for sharing the stage. And Victor, thank you for again putting together this extraordinary breakfast. And I salute our Ukrainian heroes. This for me is the most important breakfast in Davos. And I'm delighted to be here. Alexander Stubb, President Stubb, I wanted to turn to you and ask you, how do we actually get to the next stage that Mark Rutte has mentioned and to what Larry Fink just called the resolute peace and security that Ukraine needs? What are the next steps and how do we get Russia to the table?
Sure. Thanks a lot, Zani, and thanks, Victor, for the invitation. And thank you to all Ukrainian soldiers for what you do for protecting Europe. Before I begin, let me just gently remind on the Arctic question that NATO was just expanded with a country that has 1 million individuals trained in Arctic conditions, and that country is Finland. So I think we can do a lot on Arctic security. Now, my 2 points, one on the peace process and the second one on the narrative of the war. On the peace process, I think we are in a good place in the sense that the United States, Ukraine, and Europe, or more specifically the coalition of the willing, is on the same page. Ever since Jared Kushner came in with the help of the work of Jonathan Powell and many others, we're now in a concrete stage where we're looking at somewhere between 5+2 documents which have to do with security guarantees, the prosperity package, which Larry has been working on, a sequencing document, and many others, and the 20-point plan, of course. I think on this particular situation, we're going to be in a position whereby we have full agreement between Ukraine, the United States, and Europe on what I would consider to be a good package, which has, I think, the elements for a lasting peace. But here's where I come to my second point, and that is that I'm not convinced that Russia will approve this. And this is the worry that I have, and that's why I fully agree with Mark that this is not over. Right now, what we need to do is to focus on the today and the near future and how we can provide and sustain and help Ukraine. Now, on the narrative of the war, this is something that I'm a little bit baffled, both in the international discourse and perhaps in some of the things that we hear also coming from the United States. Let's make this clear. Putin has failed in every and each one of his strategic aims. Number one, he wanted to take over Ukraine and make it Russian. He failed. He will not take over Ukraine, and Ukraine will become a member of the European Union. Number two, he wanted to prevent the enlargement of NATO. He got two substantive military powers into the alliance and doubled his border with the alliance because Finland joined. Number three, he wanted to project power around the world and in the region. Look what's going on in Central Asia. Look what's going on in the Southern Caucasus. Look what's going on in Iran. Look what's going on in Syria. Look what's going on in Venezuela. It's not exactly a success story from the perspective of the Kremlin. My final point is to say, from a military perspective, there seems to be this narrative that Russia is winning. I fundamentally disagree. In the past 1,000 days, Russia has advanced a maximum of 1 percentage point of Ukrainian territory. Today, the cost of that is 1,000 dead soldiers per day. That's 30,000 roughly per month. And this is dead, not only wounded, and on the Russian side. In Afghanistan, in 10 years, 20,000 Russian soldiers died. On top of that, the Russian economy is suffering. There's zero growth, no more reserves. If inflation rates continue to multiply on the level at which they have been this year, that will be 30% of inflation this year. Add to that 16% interest rates. I don't think that the argument that Russia does not want to end the war because it believes that it can advance holds. I think the argument that Russia does not want to end this war because it is too expensive for Putin to end. He will not be able to pay the Russian soldiers. So the big dilemma that we right now have is that how can we force Russia to end this war? And there are only two things that we can do. One, continue to provide Ukraine with everything it's possible, and two, put more economic pressure on Russia. And then we will see that Ukraine will have won this war at the end of the day. Thank you.
Let me move over to the president of Latvia, who's an old friend of Ukraine, has been at this breakfast many times. There is now talk of fast-tracking Ukraine's membership into the European Union. Usually this process takes a long time. Understandably, there are many conditions. There are many legal, economic reforms that Ukraine has to do, or a country has to do, to become the member of the European Union. How is this going to work with Ukraine?
Well, thank you very much. I want to congratulate you for this upgrade, because I feel now like in interrogation room with the bad cop and the good cop asking all the questions. But coming to your question, I do believe, and I very much agree with Alex, that we must work to ensure that Ukraine becomes the European Union member. Having said that, I think that we need also to reckon with three elements. Number one is Ukraine itself, because membership in the European Union is both strategic, political, but also it's merits-based. And the reform process, fight against corruption, justice reform, also the alignment of many of Ukrainian economies to European standards is going to be an issue. Number two, and I think that's going to be also the moment of truth for all 27 EU member states, when we will have to convince our publics, when we will have to face many interests from agriculture to industry, and then of course it's going to be a very, very tough work, taking also into account what is happening in many of the European countries from the internal political point of view. From point of view of Latvia, we will do our best to get Ukraine as fast in the European Union as possible. And number three, the third element, is I do believe also that when we look at the Ukrainian membership in the European Union, we probably need also to address this from the broader perspective. Normally, we have seen the European Union as political union, as monetary union, as economic union. But if Ukraine enters the European Union, I do believe it's also going to make European defense identity much, much stronger. And this is something where I would say, when we talk about Ukrainian membership, yes, we will have a lot of questions. We'll have questions about quotas when it comes to goods and services. We will be having a lot of discussion about reforms. But when we talk about that, let's keep in mind that Ukraine in EU makes European Union also much stronger from security and defense point of view, with the largest fighting army in Europe, with all what they have done. And also I want to use this opportunity to say that when we see those soldiers fighting right now, they also understand that they are keeping the whole of Europe out of the war of aggression that Russia would probably be able to launch as we speak. That's where the strategic choice for me is obvious. Ukraine must be in EU, but I also understand it's not going to be a very easy political debate across European capitals.
I'd like to turn now to the Prime Minister of the Netherlands to continue this conversation about the challenge for the EU. Prime Minister, the President of Latvia has just laid out what Ukraine needs to do, but also what the European Union needs to do. And maybe you could elaborate on how you see the EU rising to the challenges, both of providing financing for these years to come so that we can have this resolute security that Larry Fink laid out, but also the seriousness of the path to EU membership. It will be difficult, as the President laid out, but what do you think needs to be done to give the people in this room confidence that the EU is for real on this?
Well, yes, I think the last decision the European Council made in December was very important, 19 billion for support for Ukraine for the years 26 and 27. It was a tough European Council, but in the end we made it. And I think it was a very strong signal to the people of Ukraine that we are there, and that we are there for them, and that we fully realize, as the Netherlands have been from the start, that this is not only about Ukraine, but that the Russian aggression war against Ukraine is also about freedom and security in Europe. And that's also why the Dutch actually provided a lot of money, a lot of financial support, political support and military support. And also we're welcoming those who need to go out of Ukraine and find a place somewhere in Europe. And I think that is important. So there can be no question about the support that Europe and the European Union gives to Ukraine. And in relation to the membership, there is no question that the place to be for Ukraine is the European Union. But the pathway to the membership of the European Union, I would probably agree with the President of Latvia. I mean, we have to, it's a balanced process. And the country is currently at war. And it's amazing what the country has been doing in its own governance to step up to the threshold of the European Union. And we should salute that and further support that. And then, in the end, there will be a membership of Ukraine for the European Union.
Can I just ask one follow-up onto that? When you say in the end, what kind of time frame are we talking about?
Yeah, well, I think that's very difficult. Because if we look at the way we are dealing with it now, it will take a couple of years. We have to be honest about that. Because we don't want to bring the European Union itself unstabilized when a country comes in too quickly. So we have to find ways to make very clear that the European Union is the end station for Ukraine. It's the home for Ukraine. But at the same time, we have to be very careful, also in regard to our population, but also to the institutions, and also for Ukraine itself, that they step up to all the thresholds that are needed to come into the European Union.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to take this opportunity to just once again break from the program on stage, because we have a very special guest with us. We have President Trump's representative to deal with negotiations on Ukraine and many other matters. One of the most important members of the Trump administration, and the point man certainly on the discussion of how to negotiate some kind of settlement, Steve Witkoff. Can I get you, Steve, to tell us a little bit about the progress of the talks and how close you think we are to a deal?
First of all, thank you. Kellyanne, thanks for having me. You can't say no to Kellyanne. She asked me last night to be here, but it's an easy one because I have many friends here, including my new friend David. First of all, thank you. I think we've made a lot of progress. I think in the beginning of this process, there was a little bit of confusion. I was going to Moscow quite a bit, but I think it was important that we go there because we're at the end now, and I actually am optimistic. I spent the evening with David last night, with General Budanov, who's now Vice President Budanov, and Rustem. They've been amazing, by the way. To the Ukrainian people here, you have an amazing negotiating team. We spent a lot of time together. I don't know how much, but it could be 100 hours together since Geneva. It's literally that comprehensive. And I think we've got it down to one issue, and we have discussed iterations of that issue, and that means it's solvable. So if both sides want to solve this, we're going to get it solved. That's my view. And I told the president that last night. And last night, Mark, I think, and it informs on this, the president sent out the tweet. We had a great meeting about NATO, about the European-American alliance, which informs on this conflict too, I think, as we discussed. So I feel encouraged. David, you're great to work with. And Rustem, and by the way, I want to mention President Zelensky because he's been on this issue. He's available, he's accessible. Whenever there's a need to call him to get a steer, we get on the phone with him. And of course, as everyone knows with President Trump, just as he said yesterday, Mark, with you, when we were talking about direct negotiations, he said, well, can I handle the negotiation directly?
Would love to, right?
So the president is always accessible as well, just the way he is. So we're off to Moscow tonight. We're not staying over. We're going right to Abu Dhabi. That's an important data point because in Abu Dhabi will be the working groups, military to military, prosperity. Jared and I talk all the time about the importance of prosperity, and of course we have what I would regard as the best-in-class prosperity advisor on the team, and that's Larry Fink.
Yes.
And Larry was good enough to volunteer for the job. I volunteered for the last 11 months, so why shouldn't Larry volunteer? And Jared as well, by the way. He's now a volunteer as well. President Trump is very good at saving money, Davida, okay? He gets us all for free. And you do too now. So, but prosperity is really big. All night long, we spent at dinner last night talking about the upward trajectory for the Ukrainian economy and financial system. Capital markets, the jobs. The president has talked about a tariff-free zone from Ukraine that I think would be game-changing. You'll see industry move into that area in a huge way. Imagine you get to outcompete because you're not paying tariffs and sending goods into the United States. So there's some huge things that we've talked about that the Ukrainian people deserve because they have been so courageous in this fight. And they're under some real difficult conditions today. And I am completely empathetic on behalf of the president and our administration to that. And that's part of why we're going to Moscow, to have that discussion about how we end this thing and how we make it better for your people. So with that, I'll turn it back to the panel, and I'll thank you for allowing me to be here today and make some remarks. And I want you to know that this is the most important endeavor that Jared and I have. We are tasked with doing everything possible to get this solved, and with the president's indomitable spirit and President Zelensky's indomitable spirit, because I'm pretty sure that he feels as President Trump does, this is time to end this. I think we're going to get it done. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was incredibly valuable to hear literally from the negotiator's mouth where things stand. Let me go next to the Prime Minister of Belgium. One of the one of the ways that Europe can demonstrate that it is serious about confronting the challenge from Russia would be, it would seem to me, confiscating Russian sovereign assets. This is an easy demonstration of European will. It does set a precedent, there's no question, and it feels to me that the precedent it sets is if you ruthlessly and aggressively invade your neighbor, violate international law, and commit war crimes, your money is now not safe. Why is that not happening? You know, I ask this because the government of Belgium has had a somewhat complicated stance on this issue.
So now I know why you invited me. It's a very nice question. It's of course a very sensitive topic. I think first and foremost I want to say it's Europe's obligation to finance Ukraine, and we did. Europe will never win beauty prizes for the way it takes decisions, but at the end of the day there is a result, 90 billion to finance Ukraine this year and next year. So we got a solution. It went unnoticed, but we also decided that the Russian central bank money, the immobilized assets, not the frozen assets, the immobilized assets, most of which are in Belgium, in the clearinghouse Euroclear, are immobilized for an indefinite period. This is a very important decision, because of course you cannot just take somebody's money. We're not at war with Russia. Europe is not at war with Russia. You cannot simply confiscate money. That is an act of war. You shouldn't underestimate it. It has never happened in history. Immobilized money, even during the Second World War, was never confiscated. It would be the very first time that that would happen in history, and that would have grave consequences for Europe, for the belief, the trust in the financial system, for the Eurozone. It is not to be underestimated. There's no such thing as free money. Anything that sounds simple in reality is very complicated. And it went unnoticed, but we immobilized indefinitely. It is no longer depending on the sanctions that we have to prolong every 6 months. And we all know that not everybody at the European table, Europe is not a country, it's not a superstate with a supreme leader, it is a confederation. Everybody needs to agree. And we all know a difficult truth, some European countries are not so pro-Ukrainian. Some might, at some stage, say we do no longer want to prolong sanctions, and then immediately you have to release those assets. Now, if you take assets, confiscate them, spend them, and at a certain moment in time you have to repay them, then you have a big problem. So I think we took a very good decision. The financing of Ukraine is there, and the assets will be immobilized until the end of the war, which means that, as it always went in history, when there will be a peace deal, the assets will be on the table. And let me be very clear about that. At that moment, if I have my way and I have a say in this, every penny of that money will be used for the repayment and the reconstruction of Ukraine. I would be very sad to see €1 return to Moscow. But we have to respect international law. It will happen at that moment. And between that moment and now, Europe will finance the war in Ukraine, as we should do, because they are fighting for us.
Well, that's a very reassuring statement. Zani, do you have a...
It is a very reassuring statement, but it does, I think your frankness, Prime Minister, in saying not all members of the European Union, you said some are not so pro-Ukraine. And I think it is important to take that realism in the next question, which I'm going to pose to the Prime Minister of Croatia, because I would like to ask you, over the next few years, to get to this goal that you have all committed to, that Ukraine should be part of the European Union, what are you going to do? First of all, how does the EU need to change? And what are you going to do to be credible to everybody in this room that this really is a goal that is imminent and not a goal that is decades hence? Because the European Union does have a history of talking about membership and then taking decades to get there.
Well, first of all, thanks to Victor for another invitation for the Ukrainian breakfast, and on behalf of Croatian government and someone who has been here for years, Croatia certainly belongs to the group of countries which is very clearly pro-Ukrainian in terms of solidarity and support all along. stemming from our own experience, because Croatia, due to the greater Serbian aggression in the beginning of the 90s, had at one point also 27% of its territory occupied. Ukraine today has around 19.5%, and that is the result of the aggression that is actually long now for more than 12 years. When it comes to the European Union stance towards Ukraine, here I would say that there are some of us who have bilateral agreements with Ukraine clearly defining our support towards membership. This is something I signed with President Zelensky before the second aggression in December in 2021. I think that Dick has said something which is very important. The overall situation with Ukraine, in my view, has three elements. One is the peace process, second is the integration, third one towards the European Union, and third one is the reconstruction. Of course, the conditio sine qua non is to stop the Russian aggression against Ukraine, which actually at the moment we don't see stopping because of the continuous drafting of the new soldiers on the Russian side. Basically, if they lose 1,000 people a day, there are 1,000 new conscripts coming and being prepared for the Ukrainian front. Unfortunately, everything that Alex has said in respect to the effects of the restrictive measures and sanctions and the weakening of the Russian economy and the inflationary pressures and everything that is supposed to have an effect has not translated into a political change in Russia. This is the key problem. And I think Ukraine is, of course, aware, all of us who are there aware. In other circumstances, maybe you would have had a grassroots movement, civil society, media, independent institutions, opposition. Over there, we don't see it. Unfortunately, we are observing very closely, but we don't see it, and we do not really see that this will change. This is important. So on the EU side, there is one element which all our Ukrainian friends should be aware. The approach to the enlargement so far was based on the so-called merit-based approach of every country that aspires to be a member, which means there are criteria, process. When the process is fulfilled, everybody agrees with the Commission's assessment in the Council, and then the process can be completed. What we see now are the signals of the different approach, and that approach is geopolitical. And that is, in my view, the only real chance that speedier integration of Ukraine to the European Union will happen. But it will not happen without two critical debates. The famous fourth Copenhagen criteria, I mean the Copenhagen of 1993, which is the so-called absorption capacity of the European Union. And the absorption capacity in terms of Ukrainian membership means impact on budget, impact on key policies such as agriculture, cohesion, and most of all, the decision-making process. This will have to be combined in a way so that we deliver. That's why I'm not surprised that the Netherlands, who has always been, I would say, the watchdog of the proper enlargement, is a little bit more reserved than those countries who have. We are friends, and I can say it. And Mark was exactly the same as you are, so it's not the change. I think the Ukraine has to be aware of this. So one thing is the political aspiration. The other thing is actual consensus on the date and its implications. So I think we are at a good position today. But before that, the key thing is to end the war. What I would advise, and I said this to President Zelensky, all the peace agreements and documents, they have two aspects. One is the moment in the context when they are signed, the pressure, the time, the sort of exhaustion of the difficulties that you are in, and their historical consequences 5, 10, 20 years later. My advice is never to leave an ink of a pen on the paper that would de jure give up Ukrainian territory. I think this is critically important for the whole legacy of this generation of Ukrainians, everything they have done so far, not only for the Ukrainian interest, but also as a clear precedent for the stability of international system and the international law, international relations in the future. This is something that we should not forget in trying to help Ukraine to attain the peace and prosperity, of course, which we shall support, and we as a country have supported them in every possible way that we could.
Let me move to Let me move to a Ukrainian a friend, the Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine, Taras Kachka. One of the challenges that Ukraine faces in meeting these conditions for Europe is the perception that Ukraine still remains a very, to be honest, bureaucratic and corrupt country. In fact, there has been a recent corruption scandal that engulfed Ukraine, required the resignation of key members of the government. What do you think Ukraine can do that will assure Europe and the international community that it is actually engaging in the kind of deep structural reforms, almost a reconstruction of its government, that would be required to genuinely qualify for European Union membership?
Thank you for this question that addressed to the most bureaucratic-looking member of the Ukrainian cabinet.
You are not, by far.
I think that first you see that how the project of bringing prosperity to Ukraine is complex, since we need 7+ speakers to explain all dimensions. And so I will concentrate on your questions, but I agree with majority of what was said, and I think that it's important to understand where we are, not only on what we need to do, but where we are in our position, so that all our partners want predictability, trust, rule of law. We also want predictability in security guarantee, in financial support, and predictability in accession to the EU. So we need to agree that we are in consent with merit-based approach to EU accession, but we want your commitment to accept us by certain date, so that it will not happen somewhere in uncertainty. And if we are talking about complex figures, we need to find a solution how to bring Ukraine to the EU and provide free tariffs for certain territories to export to the United States, however complex it is in EU trade law. Yeah. But let's talk about rule of law and corruption, where I think that we need to be conscious that we are in the, let's say, final and the most complex stage of structural transformation that lasted since 2015 or 2014. So we, thanks to the current parliament and MPs, we have independent and very functional anti-corruption framework. And the figures for last year, so that just like I will quote as a bureaucrat, yeah. So that's so NABU has started 737 cases last year. So it has special anti-corruption prosecution made 124 indictments against 280 persons in Ukraine, and courts issued 93 sentences against 130 persons. So it is there, and in my opinion, since I actually presented the resignation of these two ministers in parliament, is that every discovered case in Ukraine is a win, because we are getting cleaner. And yes, indeed, we still have some, let's say, echoes of the July events. Yeah, so indeed it was a mistake, and we all made a lot of mistakes. For example, we non-providing to Ukraine Taurus or Tomahawks, but we fixed our mistake. And the question whether other mistakes are fixed. We still have a lot of indecisiveness among our partners, and that's why we really committed to do the things, and we highlighted this in papers on prosperity, that we committed to all reforms within EU accession. We are saying that we want merit-based accession, and tomorrow I will report to member states on our success and so on. But we need to spend this year not yelling about complexities, not to lecture each other, but to close in all these things, to close the peace deal, to advance on EU accession, on prosperity things, and next year to celebrate, maybe celebrate accession to the EU, even if it sounds fantastic. Thank you.
What a wonderful note of optimism, and I'm delighted to hear this level of detailed commitment from you and these warm words of encouragement from the Prime Ministers of the European Union. But I'd like to turn now to a contribution from the floor from Jonathan Powell, my fellow countryman and National Security Advisor to the United Kingdom. You heard those wonderful words from Steve Witkoff earlier about how well the negotiations were going, and that you were going to Moscow. And I'd like to ask you, Jonathan, as a man who's got tremendous experience in reaching successful negotiations too, what do you think needs to be done to get President Putin to agree?
Thanks, Danny, and thank you very much, Victor, for arranging this breakfast. I had the pleasure of meeting these soldiers from Ukraine yesterday, and I would pay tribute not just to their heroism, but also to the suffering that some of them have been through as prisoners of war and the brutal treatment they've had from the Russians in those circumstances. It's perfectly clear this war won't end with a victory on either side. Russia is not going to be able to defeat Ukraine, thanks to the bravery of these soldiers. Ukraine will not be able to reclaim its territory by physical force, so there have to be negotiations. And President Trump is quite right to push these negotiations, to use his power to make them succeed. And we have made a lot of progress on our side. Steve, Jared, together with the Ukrainian negotiators and Europeans, have agreed a whole range of things, from security guarantees, prosperity, which Larry Fink is working on. But what we haven't seen is any evidence from President Putin that he is prepared to compromise, that he is prepared to negotiate, he's prepared to compromise and actually make peace. I think the only thing, having watched President Putin for 25 years, is that he's very indecisive. He finds it very hard to reach a decision. He's a judo player. He keeps his options open. So I think what we have to do is apply pressure to President Putin, financial pressure, military pressure, and have a deadline where he has to make a decision. I think that's the only thing that will make this work. And now he's become a member of the Board of Peace. I hope he can actually live up to his new role and deliver that peace by engaging seriously. The only other thing I would say is that, having worked on a very large number of both successful and failed peace processes, is they always take a lot longer than you expect. That's one rule for all of them. So I think we should be patient. This won't be solved tomorrow. It's important to push, as Steve is doing, but it doesn't happen immediately. We have to remain committed to it, and most of all, we have to find a way of Putin seriously engaging. And no doubt Steve, given his remarkable abilities, will achieve that tomorrow in Moscow before going on to the Emirates. Thanks.
Let me call on a private citizen now, Eric Schmidt. About a year into the war, I suggested to Eric that he join me to attend the conference that Victor throws in Ukraine every year, which he has thrown for 20-odd years now, whose purpose is, and this is prescient 20 years ago, to integrate Ukraine into the Western world and to integrate Ukraine into Europe in particular. Eric was delighted to come and became an ardent supporter of Ukraine, but beyond that also found that Ukraine was in some ways the most innovative country in the world in a very critical way. And I want you, Eric, to tell us what you thought then and what you think now of the way Ukraine is fighting this war. Can we get another mic that works, please?
Thank you, Fareed. One of the things that I learned about war is that the war competition is tougher than business competition because lives are at stake. And the transformation in Ukraine from a tech-ish country to a tech country at scale has been dramatic. How do you win or hold against a larger opponent, 3 times, 4 times more people, much more weapons, artillery, and so forth? The answer is you innovate. And so as the brutal necessity of the war started, or became, Ukraine developed a sort of a new form of war, right, largely leading with drones. Soon the Russians copied. And so now in the crucible of this horrible, horrible war, which I spent a lot of time in, you're seeing whole new techniques that will be used in the future for national security, for NATO, for the West, and undoubtedly for our enemies as well. I've come to the view that war is actually going to completely reverse, and that the way you do war and the way you do national security will start with robots in the form of drones, air, land, and sea, and so forth. It is my absolute conviction that when this war is over, that Ukraine will become one of the largest suppliers of this new form of war, new form of defense, because the people are really that good. Yeah. And by the way, having spent a lot of time with these people, you cannot imagine the courage of the people at this table. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric. I'd like to now turn to Jens Stoltenberg, Minister of Finance of the Kingdom of Norway, and of course former NATO Secretary General. To build on that, Jens, you have extraordinary experience both of understanding the military side of things and now the financial constraints involved. And I wondered if you could elaborate on what for you resolute security for Ukraine implies. What are the nature of the guarantees and the implementation thereof that would actually provide the security that is needed?
Thank you so much, Sani, and many thanks to Victor for hosting this very important event, and again, many thanks to the Ukrainian soldiers. Well, I think what it holds is that we need to not only agree among ourselves on a platform for peace in Ukraine, but we need to do something which is more difficult, and that is to find a way to agree with President Putin. And I met President Putin for the first time in year 2000. He was a newly elected president of Russia. I was a newly elected Prime Minister of Norway, and over the following years I actually worked with him on many different issues. We were even able to make big agreements on, for instance, a delimitation line in the Barents Sea. So the big question is whether we are able to make an agreement with Putin now on peace in Ukraine. And I don't think we can change Putin's mind. His aim, his ambition is to control Ukraine. There's no doubt about that. But I think we can change Putin's calculus, that if the price he has to pay for controlling Ukraine is too high, then he will be forced to sit down and negotiate something which is acceptable for Ukraine. And the only way to get there is to provide military support to Ukraine. That's the only way, because the cost has to be so high that he accepts to sit down and respect Ukraine as a sovereign independent nation. Therefore, I welcome what NATO and NATO allies do. NATO is playing a more important role in coordinating support, thanks to Mark. But I also, of course, know that the only way NATO can, NATO allies and Western countries can provide support to Ukraine is that individual allies provide that support to Ukraine. And I moved from my position in Brussels to a job I had 30 years ago, being Minister of Finance in Norway. Most people move forward, I will move backwards. But I'm proud that the first decision I was part of, the first bill I put forward to the Parliament, was to triple Norway's financial support to Ukraine. Meaning that we now provide $8.5 billion yearly, last year and this year. We are less than 6 million people, but we need to step up. More support to Ukraine is the only way to facilitate a negotiated solution and to end the war. And that's why this is so important. Thank you.
Thanks.
When we talk about support for Ukraine, of course, many people wonder how strong is the American commitment to Ukraine. And American government still in the Constitution has 3 branches of government, and we have a very distinguished representative from the first branch of government, the Congress. Chris Coons, do you want to give us a sense of the mood in Congress in terms of support for Ukraine?
Thank you. One of the questions I think we should be asking in the United States is, who are these brave soldiers fighting for? Yes, they're fighting for their families, they're fighting for their country, but they're fighting for us. They're fighting for our freedom and our future. This will be defined as a century of freedom when they win. And the United States should be absolutely clear that we will provide uninterrupted, robust intelligence support, military support, and financial support to the cause of Ukraine. I'm here with a bipartisan delegation, Senators Tillis and Murkowski, Senator Graham, who has been furiously texting with me. Don't give him your number if you want to sleep. He is relentless. And I just want to briefly say, many of you know that there is unfinished work in the United States Congress. Next week, we will pass the Defense Appropriations Bill. I'm the senior Democrat on defense and intelligence appropriations. And it will include funding for Ukraine, for U.S. assistance directly to Ukraine, which I believe is an important public signal, hundreds of millions of dollars. But we also need to be prepared to ratify a strong security guarantee. So if we can do what has to be done next, and get Putin to the table and provide the pressure on him and on all those who are buying his oil, we can conclude this war. So we need to be insistent and courageous and determined as politicians, every bit as much as these men and women who have served and sacrificed are. And we must be clear-eyed that the issues discussed, admission to the EU, access to frozen funds, sustained reform within Ukraine, incredible innovation that is transforming the future of conflict, can and should be met, as Steve mentioned, by tariff-free access to the United States markets and with a persistent and sustained, not just cautious, not just hesitant, but celebratory support of the fight for freedom that these Ukrainians have dedicated their lives and hearts to. Thank you.
Senator, thank you. I am struck by how wonderfully upbeat our conversation has been this morning. And I'd like now to turn to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of Poland, Radek Sikorski, a man who is has been a powerful voice and a powerful supporter and indeed proponent of the debate around Ukraine for many years, actually. And you've been very far-sighted in seeing the dangers of President Putin and the risks. I'd like to ask you for your sort of sober assessment, not just celebrating the progress that has been made, but what worries you most?
Thank you, Zanny. In addition to saluting the soldiers, I'd like to salute the ordinary Ukrainians who are going through hell right now. A large proportion of the people of Ukraine live in the type of communist-era housing estates on which I was brought up in communist Poland. And they depend for heat and electricity on these area heating plants. And when the heat and electricity don't come through, you actually have to drain water from the radiators, and then these housing estates become almost unlivable. And you now have an exodus of population from the major population centers, including Kyiv. And it's a real danger to Ukraine. These people did nothing to deserve this. Deliberately targeting civilian infrastructure is a war crime. Vladimir Putin is no man of peace. I was very cheered to hear Mr. Witkoff's assessment that we might be close to a deal, and I hope he's right. In the spirit of President Trump's hyper-realism, I'd like to just say what Europe's cards in this are. So last year, we financed not just the war, but also the functioning of the Ukrainian state. The biggest sanction on Russia is the denial of the European market to Russian oil and gas. We have sanctioned the clunker fleet. We have, as the Prime Minister of Belgium said, we have now permanently blocked the Russian assets. We have pledged 90 billion euros to sustain Ukraine for this year and next. We will be providing the majority of funds for Ukraine's reconstruction. We will take some risks in admitting Ukraine into the EU, and it is our security that is at stake. Poland is actually the only NATO and EU country that borders both on Russia and Ukraine. So these are our cards, and here's my one suggestion and one worry. The worry is that if Ukraine doesn't end up within defensible borders as a result of the deal that I hope comes, we will be planting the seeds of the next war. And my final suggestion is that to get to a fair deal, you have to put pressure not on the victim of aggression, but on the aggressor. Thank you very much.
we've spoken a lot about the Ukrainian soldiers who are here, heralded their extraordinary courage. And for those of us who have seen them in Ukraine, it really is remarkable. I thought I'd call on one of them to share perspective at this moment. Yuri Filatov has a job that 3 or 4 years ago didn't exist in any army in the world. He is the unmanned aerial vehicle commander of the 3rd Army Corps. Yuri.
Yeah, thank you, gentlemen, ladies. Thank you for this opportunity to come here and to have this message directly from frontline. During these days, we have great conversations with many nations, first of all, European nations, and my main message would be for them. You know, this kind of conversation we have right now is remind me where our conversation during December 2021, probably January 2022, in Ukraine with our friends. And we were also discussing possibilities, what would come and what can happen. Right now we are in a state that international law is not working anymore. And we as Ukrainians know that for a long time. Let's shortly remind how we get here. Ukraine has given 3rd largest nuclear arsenal giveaway for international guarantees. We gave up our missiles to Russia. Actually, they flew later to us again. And then was 2014 and Crimea. And we suppose that, okay, we have guarantees, we have international law. But no, it was not that time. It was inconvenient topic. And we decided to close eyes for this incident. And actually, this is what we see right now is a chain of events that are linked all together. When international law doesn't work, then strength becomes the only thing that accountable. And I believe that, you know, when I was staying in line at enlistment military office in 2022, being an IT professional for 20 years, I was very angry for ourselves because we were believing in this. And that was not there, in fact. You know, right now, I'm talking to you as a chief unmanned system officer of 3rd Army Corps, the corps that is larger than average European army, the corps that is holding 200 kilometers of front line and which is destroying 1,000 enemies per week. And from this perspective, I have a couple of advices. Just accept the reality. The reality, a new reality, that international law doesn't work. This strange, actually, the only thing that these mere empires could actually listen to and could understand. It's not, unfortunately, I don't really believe in deals, because deals also are kind of rational, but they are not. And so please accept this. As soon as you accept, you will not be angry on yourself when something would happen to, first of all, to European. None of individual European armies can withdraw for the army we are holding. We are holding right now 1 million+ army at the border of European Union. We are discussing that acceptance of Ukraine to European Union as it is. In fact, I believe Ukrainian army already a part of European security. We entered by fact the European Union. Thank you. So please, be united. United Europe should unite all together, and be strong, because only that matters for Putin's new empire. Thank you.
Zanny, can I take this moment to hand over the podium to you, because I have to go and chair the session with the President of Israel in the main WEF hall. President Stubb has a similar commitment, and I think the Prime Minister of Belgium has one. So Zanny is going to solo moderate. So now the IQ level has really gone up.
Hardly, but thank you, Fareed. Thank you, President Stubb. Thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you, Yuri Filatov, for that very powerful intervention and indeed extremely powerful point. Ukraine is already protecting European security. I think that is something absolutely essential for us to know. We've been honored to be joined by two more US senators, Senator Murkowski and Senator Tillis. And I wondered, Senator Tillis, whether you would like to offer your perspective on the role that you would like the United States to play, both in the achievement of a peace deal and then in the sustaining of credible security guarantees for Ukraine.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Tom Tillis, Senator from North Carolina. Some of you may not know about North Carolina, but one of the reasons, and actually if I speak about the military service members here, if I shed a tear, it's a tear of gratitude. But we're the home of the Global Response Force. When the President has an emergency somewhere around the world, it's the 82nd Airborne from Fort Bragg that leave and literally can take a city and deploy it anywhere in the world within 96 hours. Down the road from there, we're the home to half of the Marine Corps at Camp Lejeune. I can tell you, gentlemen and ladies of the Ukrainian Army, we are in awe of your courage and what you've done on the battlefield. Will you please stand and let all of us give you a warm round of applause? Please stand. God bless you. God bless your families. And God bless Ukraine. I ran from the other end of Davos to make sure that I could get here, and if I did nothing more, thank you. I was in Kyiv. I was at the Munich Security Conference last year. And then I left there, went to Poland, took the train to Kyiv. And I went out to Bucha. And I think a number of people in the United States and many people who are negotiating this peace need to understand what happened there. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. I live about the same distance from downtown Charlotte as Bucha is from Kyiv. And we all know that month, early after the invasion, the illegal invasion that allowing Putin effected after he said he had a special military operation. It was military exercises. This is the litany of lies of Putin that I hope to get to. But now let's get back to Bucha. Over the course of 30 days, the president of Russia allowed the systematic kidnap, torture, rape, and murder of people in a suburb just 30 minutes outside of Kyiv. This is what that vicious dictator of Russia perpetrated on the poor, innocent civilians of Bucha. I saw this in Bucha, and I went to the memorial. I saw all those lives, more than 500 lost, at the direct command and knowledge of Vladimir Putin. He has systematically done that throughout all of Ukraine. And you all, in spite of that, in spite of the threat to your families, in spite of the murder that's occurred over this weekend while he pretends to want peace, you've stood strong. And you need to understand that the American people are behind you. And we will be behind you. And as a U.S. Senator, I will do everything I can to bring the Article I branch behind you And there will be no lasting peace unless it's something that's ratified by the Article 1 branch. It can't just be a deal. It can't be something that Vladimir Putin won't honor. It has to be something that has the binding force of a treaty and subject to the Article 1 branch. Otherwise, in my opinion, it's not worth the paper it's written on. Vladimir Putin is a liar. Ukraine stands in the breach. After the Munich Security Conference this year, I'll be traveling to Moldova. Thank God, in spite of Russia's attempts to steal that election, democracy won. And this poor country, which incidentally has North Carolina National Guard stationed there, is still hoping that we succeed in Ukraine so that Putin will not continue his march through Moldova, the West Balkans, and tried to reestablish the Russian Empire. This is unacceptable. And it's as big a threat to the United States as it is to Europe. For anybody who thinks we have a big ocean that protects us, they don't understand history. They don't understand that Xi Jinping is cheering on Vladimir Putin and hoping that the West makes a mistake. But ladies and gentlemen, we have an opportunity to turn the tide. We have an opportunity to end Putin's ambitions. We have an opportunity to free the Russian people ultimately and have them live in a family of democracies. But in the meantime, our family, the family of democracies in NATO, have to stand strong, and the United States has to unequivocally commit to NATO in its current form and build on it. This is the most important treaty organization in the history of the world. It's a reason why we've had the level of peace that we have had over the last 80 years. And if we want to continue that peace, if we want to continue prosperity, and if we want to continue to spread democracy throughout the world, America must lead. And I'm here to help you, and once again, I want to thank you for your courage. I want to thank you for overnight becoming the most powerful army in Europe. I don't know how you do it, but every night I pray for you, and every night I will pray for you until Ukraine is free. Thank you.
Senator, thank you for those powerful words. Let me now turn to a man who will give us a provocative and broader historical perspective. I don't think I even need to say his name, but Professor Neil Ferguson, what is your take on this? And what are we missing in this conversation this morning?
Thank you, Zanny. I can't match Senator Tillis for rhetorical passion, though I admire the sentiments he just expressed. But I can't help but point out how strange this week has been. This Davos was billed as the spirit of dialogue. But the dialogue that I've been reminded of is the Melian dialogue in Thucydides' history of the Peloponnesian Wars, which you all are familiar with, I'm sure. The key passage is the line in which the Athenians tell the Melians, the strong do what they wish, the weak do what they must. And that's been in some ways the nature of the surreal conversation that has gone on for most of this week, consuming most of our time about Greenland. Passionate speeches about international law, which might have come from the mouths of the Melians, and then realist responses, which certainly recall the Athenians. There are a number of European leaders here who I want to ask a question. When all the fine speeches have been made about support for Ukraine, I would love to understand why the pace of European rearmament is still so slow. Because it's one thing to commit to increase your defense spending to 3% or even 5% of GDP. It's another to actually do something, to procure the weapons, to modernize the defense forces of Europe. Let me take the example of Denmark. Denmark has very nobly delivered a very large proportion of its arms to Ukraine. I think my friend Moritz Schulrich's Kiel Institute has shown that it's probably delivered one of the largest percentages of its own arms to Ukraine, which is noble. But it's rather Melian if you don't then replace those weapons with new ones and modern ones that meaningfully contribute to Europe's defense capabilities. You are so right, Yuri. Ukraine has become the defense force of the European Union. But where are the defense forces of the real European Union member states? It's unfortunate there are no German representatives here, because that's the key issue that nobody has yet touched on. Why is it that despite the fiscal commitments that have been made by the German government, which are of course an enormously important step, the pace of German rearmament is so painfully slow? Eric Schmidt is one of those people who's making a huge effort to scale Ukrainian drone production. Think what a difference it would make if Germany today announced Operation Warp Speed for German rearmament, huge new gigafactories to scale the technology that the Ukrainians have pioneered, so that not just 3 or 4 million drones can be produced, but 10, 15 million drones. Nothing will change Putin's calculus more decisively than a meaningful increase in the pace of European rearmament. Speeches at Davos aren't going to do it, folks, no matter how passionate they are. But real and meaningful German rearmament, and I'll say also European rearmament, that's another matter. So I would urge my European friends, be a little less Melian and a bit more Athenian, and let's send a signal that no Russian dictator will ever be able to misunderstand. Because of your actions, President Putin, you have required, necessitated something that the Germans hoped they would not have to do. And that is a very rapid rearmament, which I hope will lead a general European rearmament. If any of my European friends would like to comment on this, I would very much like to hear what they are doing to bring about Operation Warp Speed and a meaningful European military response to the Russian threat. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Neil. Your European friends are indeed itching to comment on this. Mark Rutte is practically jumping out of his chair. Mark, the floor is yours.
No, but thanks for the challenge. Of course, I speak for NATO, and NATO is 50% US, and the other 50% are the other 31 allies. But amongst them, of course, outside, next to Canada, we have 30 allies in Europe. I agree with your speech when it would be about weapons delivered to Ukraine. I agree what you said about Denmark, and that they have delivered huge amounts of weapons to Ukraine, and many other countries also did. But it's not sustainable in the way it's going on now, because too many countries are not doing enough. There I would agree with your speech. I do not agree with your speech when it comes to the rearmament of Europe, and particularly not Germany. And I'm going to defend them. Germany spent in 2021 70 billion of their annual budget on defense. By 2029 that will have been risen to 160 billion. I opened a factory in Unterlüß in Germany, which is a factory providing with ammunition, 155 caliber. They have built that factory from nothing. There were sheep grazing there, to having that factory fully automated, opened in 14 months. Normally it would take you 10 years to only get the paperwork in order. Now in 40 months, from nothing to a full factory. This is what Germany is doing at the moment. They will massively grow their armed forces. And this is not only Germany, this is many countries. So I agree with you when it comes to support for Ukraine. It has to be more spread. It cannot only be dependent on Norway, the Netherlands, Canada, Denmark, Germany and a couple of other countries. There we need to have the burden sharing. But when it comes to the rearmament, I think what you said is right. We have to do it, but it is happening, and that's the good news.
Prime Minister, you wanted also to add a comment.
Just a short comment, and with a lot of appreciation for Niall and his thoughts and the comparison with the ancient Greek times. I think we have to be aware of one simple thing. One is to be a country at war, and the other one is to be covered under the umbrella of collective security in peace. I'll tell you an example of a small country. We are looking forward for 800,000 men in Ukraine under arms after the peace deal. Croatia is a country of 4 million. During the time of the Greater Serbian aggression and the occupation of our territories between 91 and 95, at the moment when the Croatian military forces liberated three-quarters of at the time occupied territories, we had 200,000 men under arms, country of 4 million. And we did it in a speedy manner of 4 days. 4 days. Plus, under the arms embargo. For years, not a single bullet was bought legally. It was all smuggled. More expensive, more difficult, and still managed. That's why the Croatian, unfortunately, unique experience on the European continent is so worthy for Ukraine, especially the part of the peaceful reintegration of the occupied territories which happened in '98. And today, to give you an example, Mark was just in Zagreb last week. We are now undergoing a huge transition from the Eastern military technology to the Western one. And I don't want to enumerate everything that we have done, but we have new European, French fighter jets, new German tanks coming, all sorts of American military equipment, helicopters, plus our own FPV drone production. One small company now became one of the important partners for Ukrainian military companies in assuring that there are enough FPV drones in Ukraine. So I think this is happening. Maybe it's not well emancipated, but it is happening. And, you know, depending on the size of the country, one can only do so much. And my final point, we really are fully aware of the suffering of the Ukrainian people. Our electricity companies, together with the Ukrainian electricity companies, we are now providing necessary equipment which was destroyed and is the one that was used in Ukraine before, and we still have it. So we want to help you to go along through this big suffering during the winter, and a lot of respect to the Ukrainian soldiers and gratefulness for everything you have done for your country and for the freedom of Europe.
Thank you. I have a very long list of people who would like to speak, but I also see that it is 9 o'clock and you all have other engagements to go to. What I would propose is that I think we should end this breakfast by hearing from one more of the Ukrainian heroes. That is what this is ultimately about. So I'd like, if they're still here, to call on Alexei and Nulia. Are you here? And could you give us, to conclude, your assessment of the stakes? What are you fighting for? What are the stakes? What do we all need to leave this breakfast knowing? And Alexei will be speaking in Ukrainian, I think.
See, I speak in language in Ukraine because please translate.
Your English is excellent. I think you could continue in English. You could continue in English. It's very good.
I was in captivity, and I can tell you that all abstract ideas disappear there. There's no geopolitics in captivity. There's no any long-term planning in captivity. But it is very clear, a message from Russia in captivity, what is freedom? Freedom is not a word on the slide. It's a possibility to say no despite the torture, act despite the prohibition, the possibility to say truth and not being killed for that. When I came back to Ukraine, I had a clear understanding that the true solution, I had a clear decision that solutions can have the power and force only when there is a real price paid for that. When I saw my mother who became a widow, my children who didn't recognize me, I saw that my brothers and sisters in arms are making an everyday choice to be free without knowing what will come tomorrow. Therefore, I can see that you are well versed in geopolitics. You have a strategy and you're doing everything you can for the security, and I'm pleased to hear that some things are being called as they really are. Our path in life, our experience, therefore, is not about the pain. If each of your individual decisions will be more specific, more swift, and it will bring about security and peace to Ukraine, then I will be able to explain to my children that our path is not about a pain, it's about a sense, a common sense.
Thank you so much. Those were powerful words with which to end on. Thank you to all of you for being here. Thank you, Victor, for once again bringing us all together. Thank you.